Hi guys, let's tune in. I missed you. Welcome to the new subscribers. And for the old tuning forks, your older brothers and sisters, I'm sorry you have to start like this, new people. But you guys, I watched some of my old videos and I'm over here like, this content's for everybody, and I'm talking like I'm spitting like I'm rapping. So I'm going to try to speak slower. And also, it's blurry. You think I'd do all this editing for you to read along the definitions with me so that you can't even see it? Nobody was going to tell me. Welcome to lesson number 3 on emotions. And we're going to talk about the introduction to the nervous system as well as mainly focused on the central nervous system, which is one of the 2 divisions of the nervous system. But we will also touch on thoughts because it is related. So I will end up putting this video in the thoughts playlist as well as the emotions. Cool? Let's do this. Okay. I'm going to give you my own definition of the nervous system first, and then we'll get into the actual research. I found that as I was watching back the videos, sometimes I feel like I can be repetitive, but I think that repetition is very important when you're learning. And I was trying to cut out a lot of that repetition, but I'm actually going to bring it back. So again, give me your feedback. This is for you and me, okay? Okay, so the nervous system. Essentially, the body has a role, right, to keep us alive. And depending on what internal state or external factors trigger us, a stimuli, right, the body is in go mode and less of your conscious brain activity is actually present. The point is, something needs to be done right now to regulate yourself or to communicate something about your environment. So the body is just doing its job. But the problem really becomes, right, what we're talking about is when we have an unregulated nervous system and now it starts acting up when we don't need it to. There's a time and a place for the nervous system to do its thing, but if it's being triggered by past memories, then we have to deal with it. That is why we are talking about the nervous system. So, I will read now. The nervous system regulation is the process by which your body keeps your internal state balanced, stable, and responsive to the environment. It's mainly controlled by the autonomic nervous system, which runs automatically. No conscious effort is required. So, 2 things: balancing your internal state and being responsive to the environment. We have 3 different functions of the nervous system, the reason why it's there to begin with: sensation, integration, and response. So let's go through them one by one. Sensation. The process of detecting changes inside or outside the body using sensory receptors. What are sensory receptors? The starting point of sensation itself. Our senses, right? Examples: eyes detect light, skin detects heat, ears detect sound. Don't get me wrong, don't go crazy now, Una. But you can have a feeling or hear something, smell something that's attached to a memory. And it can come from your external environment that therefore triggers a memory. But, I went to school for sound, and one of the topics we talked about in theory of sound is hearing sound that's not there, right? Can you hear a cow moo in your head right now? But it's not there. So the sensations can also be internal or simply driven by a memory and not needing the external sound or stimuli there. Okay? But you know how we talked about how the brain absorbs information and then goes through the process? This is the same concept, but just happening in the body. The sensation is the information that the body is taking in. Next role of the nervous system is integration. The process of interpreting sensory information, those senses, and deciding how the body should respond. Where does interpretation happen? In the brain, which mostly occurs in the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, so we will be talking about the brain and the spinal cord in more detail in just a moment, but essentially, whatever the stimuli that happens through the body needs to be interpreted by the brain, kind of, wait for it. And then we go to the third step, which is the core function of the nervous system, which is the response, right? The body's reaction to processed information through muscles or glands, depending on the sensation and what the mind interprets that sensation to be, determines the response that your body is going to have, right? They're using this example. I'm going to give it to you, but I'm going to tell you later why I have a problem with it. So, I touch something hot. That's the sensation, the heat. My brain is processing that shit is hot. So what is the interpretation of that sensation to do for the body? Back up, right? That's essentially what we're talking about here. I do want to connect it a moment to our how to update your mental database lesson. Remember, when we're updating our thoughts and what we want to think about, we want to integrate new information so that we can have thoughts that match that new information. The thoughts that we are currently having is just information from whatever we've experienced. And remember, information doesn't mean fact, okay? So, the same way we talked about the mind updating its database, updating its experiences, which I'll cover really quick right now. The mind absorbs information, it absorbs an experience. Absorption process is called learning style. Then the brain does something with the information. That is called cognitive processing. What does your brain determine that information to be to create meaning? The level of depth you go at that information now creates understanding. And then based off of what you processed that information to be, you can take actual action on it, known as thinking skills. And the reason I'm mentioning this portion again is because we can think of the same functions of the nervous system in the same way. The absorption of information, that's the sensation. Now, how is the brain processing is the same thing as the integration step in the core functions, interpreting sensory information and deciding how the body will respond. So this is occurring in the brain, right? This sensation means this, as well as the spinal cord. Now, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. So this is happening in the processing is happening in the brain and the spinal cord. Next, based off of what I've interpreted this sensation to mean, determines the action, right? The output, the thinking skill, or the response. I'm going to back away because I've determined this is hot after I felt the sensation. Cool? I'm going to post the actual diagram and you can go back to that lesson and see how these two connect. Cool? Before we get into the central nervous system, which is one of the two divisions of the nervous system, which include the brain and the spine, right, that we just talked about, I just want to touch on my trauma folks. Hey, when you go through trauma, remember it's really hard to change your database because it's filled with so many experiences that are negative. And the brain, which is a computer, simply conducting outputs of previous experiences, is looking for past experiences in your current reality. Hence why it's not fun. It's very difficult when you've gone through trauma to train the brain to think differently, to have new experiences. But it is very important. Besides thinking new thoughts, another important factor of changing the brain is that the brain is in charge of interpretation for the nervous system. So I just wanted to list off a few different ways in which your body and your nervous system will benefit from you also changing your database, having new experiences, going back to those old memories. Cool? So the brain. The brain is the main control and interpretation center for the nervous system. Its functions: interprets sensory information, thinks and learns, stores memories, makes conscious decisions. Am I choosing that thought? Am I choosing new situations? Controls emotions and voluntary actions, and performs complex integration. And this is essentially everything we've been talking about already in our thoughts playlist. Complex integration is the response that requires conscious thinking, detailed interpretation, decision-making, and combining information from many sources. Cool, right? So this is how your body, the nervous system, is going to benefit from changing that brain of yours. So the brain is less likely to interpret neural cues as danger. I'm going to be less triggered because if I've dealt with the dangerous memories that I've encountered, the brain is not going to signal to my body that I'm in a dangerous situation as often. Okay, less likely. The amygdala, which is a part of the brain, the alarm system function, becomes less reactive. The prefrontal cortex, which is also a portion of the brain, is in charge of regulation and decision making. And now it will be in better control of emotional reactions and reevaluate situations because it's less emotionally reactive. So the hippocampus, I really feel like I should go back and do research on this, remind me. But it's the memory system portion of the brain, and it helps place experience in proper context. So past threats are less likely to feel like present danger. Because remember, we spoke about this for a moment. The brain is not just storing the memory, the story, the thought. It's storing the body sensation as well. So if you smell the smell from that memory, if you feel a feeling from that memory, if you hear the music from that memory, right? If I have gone back and looked at the memory, even if my body feels the sensation and gets a bit triggered, it's less likely to happen because I dealt with the memory. It's less intense because remember, mind and body are connected here in emotional states. So both are not going off at the same time. Cool? Last but not least, which is kind of what I just said, the body's stress response is triggered less often and less intensely. Cool. Basically, a summary of what I just said is this means the brain becomes better at integrating information accurately and regulating emotional and bodily responses, so it sends fewer danger mode signals to the body. Okay, I'm going to give you guys an example before we move on to the spine, but think about the nervous system. And again, God made the body so cool. If you are in the jungle and a lion is chasing after you, you are going to run. You don't need the brain in that situation. You don't need the brain in that situation. You need to dip. You need to run. But think about being in a completely safe environment and you feel like a lion is chasing after you and you're having the same behavior you would in that previous environment. Remember, the nervous system is responsible for regulating the internal state as well as the environment. In that moment, your nervous system is working on your inner state. The environment is completely safe, but you are still running, which makes you look a little crazy. Don't worry, I've been there. And this is why we're talking about regulation of your nervous system to begin with, because we don't want our bodies to be taking over our conscious decision making. It doesn't matter how much we go back and look at those memories and things, like it's important, don't get me wrong, but if we do not regulate the body, it will take over, which will be our next two discussions of how to release this emotion from the body. Okay, I got you. Okay, so I feel like there was something else for the brain. Okay, so just to go back to the brain and the spine, this is the central nervous system. The central nervous system processes information, the brain, and acts as the control center for the body. So the brain, whatever it interprets these sensations to be, the spine is communicating what the brain is saying. The brain's in charge. Okay? But remember when we talked about the sensation of the heat? Then the body interprets that's hot. Now you're pulling away. You're having an action based off of that information. Again, with the lion, do we need our brain in that moment? Right? Like, even if we consciously go back to that situation that we were acting like the lion was chasing after us, we can deliberately go back and look at why did I have those certain actions in the conscious awareness. But the spine is going to also explain certain reflexes that happen that don't necessarily need the brain's permission. But at the same time, I would argue that, remember, the unconscious mind is a supercomputer here. So there are times where, yes, you're going to have a reflex like, that's hot, before the brain can even process because the body felt it. But there's times where I would say that the unconscious mind is just moving so fast that the conscious mind can't keep up. Even though it's like pattern recognition, right? I know something's wrong right away. I don't know why consciously, but my mind is telling me this is dangerous. Are you with me? Because we're going to use the heat example in the spine again. And I'm like, why are you giving me the same example? Are we using the brain or not? So that's what we got there. Let's get into the spine. We have the different functions of the spine that we will go through. And just very quickly, by the way, the brain and the spine, when I'm thinking about the nervous system, I'm thinking about like a Y and an X axis, right? And the brain and the spine, I'm thinking of as the Y axis. This is what's happening vertically, if that helps. Okay, let's get into the spinal cord functions. We first have the relay pathway, the communication line, right? Carries signals between the brain and the body, does not interpret meaning or emotion. So whatever the brain says about the sensation, the spine is communicating to the rest of the body. It's just carrying the message. It's just the middleman, right? It's not in charge of any of the interpretation itself. Next, we have reflex control. The next few are quite similar. The reflex control automatic responses, produces fast reactions without waiting for the brain, what I was just talking about. These are built-in protective circuits. So again, they gave me the same example, pulling hand away from a hot surface, right? I don't need to register in the brain that that's hot, even though my brain is going to register that it's hot. Okay. The knee jerk reflex, right? With the knee, I'm not going to show you my knee. It's going to automatically go, right? I don't need my brain for that. I think that's a perfect example because, right, it's like my brain is kind of unaware that my body even just did that. I'm going to post it. Okay, let's move to the next. We have the survival speed system, prioritizes speed over thinking. We talked about this a bit in the processing information lesson, which we don't want to do because we want to be thinking through things. But in terms of the nervous system, again, it's ready to fight or flight if it needs to. This is the point of the spine, of the body. So, prioritizes speed over thinking to protect the body before full awareness happens. Stepping on something sharp immediately, instantly correcting balance if you slip or trip. By the way, I want to read you guys something. Because I was like, when I was like debating the spine and the brain, what I was just telling you about, it says the spinal cord does not interpret meaning in the same way the brain does. It doesn't understand that something is hot, dangerous, or painful. That interpretation happens in the brain. What the spinal cord can do is very simple processing. Receive sensory input, right? It can bypass the brain when you feel that sensation if it's like immediate. Follow a built-in reflex pathway and send an immediate motor response. Okay? Next, we have reflex loop circuit, kind of what we just said. A direct pathway, sensory input, spinal cord, motor output. Don't you love when things line up? Okay. No emotion or decision making is involved. Okay? You don't have a choice here, right? If the spine determines that you're in danger, it's going to send the cue to move, to jerk, to duck, right? Which we want. I don't want to have to be like, oh, should I do this? No, dip, okay? And last but not least, we have simple integration. Matches input to output quickly without conscious thought. Input to output quickly without conscious thought. No memory or emotional processing. Like automatic posture adjustments, everybody. Okay. Quick withdrawal response to danger like stimuli. So this is quite similar to reflex control, and I did research this for a moment, and it gave me the example of a light switch. If you flick a switch, flick it or is okay. If you flick the light switch, the light is going to turn on, right? That's that reflex control. I'm pulling back. But this simple integration, the input to output, is more of the wiring behind the light switch, right? It's helping the light turn on. That's what you're seeing. The reflex, the flick of the switch is what you're seeing or what you have to do. But there is something happening in the background, right? And that's what simple integration is. We're not in a biology whatever class, so I'm a backup. But the point of all of this was to talk about how the nervous system is in charge of regulating your internal state, as well as responding to the environment. We'll get more into the responding of the environment later, but the nervous system is just doing its job, and we can help it do its job better by doing some of our own homework of regulating our internal state. And that internal state that we've already talked about is going back to those memories, working with the preconscious and subconscious brain, controlling our database of our thoughts, having new experiences, taking in new information. Okay? We did mention our mental database lesson, which the brain goes through a process to understand its new information and what reaction or action it will have based off of that new information, similar to the sensation. The brain or spine, the brain the brain is interpreting information, but the spine also has some capabilities when it comes to your motor skills for your reflexes, okay? So that you can have the response. We talked about how the benefits of changing the brain when it comes to the nervous system, because since the mind and the body are connected in emotional states, remember, trauma isn't just stored as a memory, as a thought. It's stored as a sensation as well. So if you can handle the memory consciously in your private alone time, then when you actually get triggered through a sensation or even through a thought, through communication, it's less likely to feel as overwhelming because you've processed some of it, right? This is not a 1-2 step. It's just not, right? The next time you come across that trigger, it's going to be like, then the next time it's going to be like, then the next time it's going to be like, then the next time it's going to be like, you see what I'm saying? So we got to start doing the work now and thinking about not just what thoughts are triggering us, but what sensations, like, why did I just react that way? One of my big ones was realizing that when I'm in a crowd, I just feel a bit overwhelmed sometimes. Or let's say loud noises. Even when I'm recording, it's quite difficult for me to focus if I can hear other things around me, even if it's small. But I'm trying to stay on track. And then I'm thinking about that. So anyway, we talked about the benefits of the brain no longer sending these dangerous signals from the interpretation of the sensation. And again, you just have to be aware what sense is being triggered. And I would also argue that the sense that is most triggered is actually more heightened. Like, some people have a very good smell system. Some people have very good ears. Some people have very good eyes. So once you kind of figure out what's triggering you, again, there's benefits to this work as well. And these are known as the clairs, which we'll get into. Slow down. Okay. Anywhooser, then we talked about the brain and then the spine communicating what the brain says, but also having its own functions of reflexes, of simple integration, right? Survival speed system, helping us to move quickly without conscious awareness. But also remember that this is exactly why we want to go back to the unconscious brain, because we want the unconscious decisions to be when we need to pull back, not because we haven't dealt with our crap. Okay? So this was the central nervous system. And next time we'll get into the second division of the nervous system, talking about those functions. I'll try to go through it quickly so we can get into how we can heal. Remember, we go back to the brain, the memory for healing of the brain, and then we'll talk about how to heal the body so that these sensations are less heightened as well when it comes to the nervous system, of when it comes to triggering trauma. At least we can learn how to regulate it. Okay? Okay. Make sure you're looking at your mental database and feel free to give me feedback anytime, because this is very important information and it needs to be understood. So I'm very open to hearing back from you guys. And also like, share, comment, and subscribe. How are people going to find us? How am I going to get paid? Okay? So, yeah. I'll see you guys later. Stay tuned in and love you.